Good evening, everyone. And after that excellent picture to start our show, it's an even greater pleasure to introduce an excellent guest, Alex Deane. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
And yourself. It's been some time since we met in person, but I think we could probably say that about the whole of the world. Really,
Yes,
it's been some
quite.
time since we met in person. Um, but I normally would do introduction, but I don't think it's necessary in your case. Let me just say one of the most eminent conservative commentators in the country, famed for Sky News paper reviews, amongst many, many other things, and Big Brother Watch as well, which was one of the first things that we met. Let's get straight into it, because now I've got you on the show, I want to make the maximum of the time. I know we've got a lot to chat about. It's the anniversary today of Lady Thatcher passing, 8 years, which is why we started the show with that caption. I met her once. I was very fortunate to meet her once, very briefly, but she had a massive effect on my life, my politics to this day. I think she was exceptional. Do you have any thoughts, any sort of feelings that you want to share with us about the lady and her effect on you?
Many. I profoundly affected my life, and I would say profoundly affected the lives of those being born today, in her commitment to freedom, in her commitment to liberty of the individual. And I think that we should long for leaders of that caliber and ability right now. I was lucky enough to meet her several times, and I was very privileged to attend her funeral. And I found that every bit as emotional as you would expect me to do. So in more light-hearted vein, I'll tell you this. One event I went to, and I took a friend of mine, more senior in years than me. In fact, he was a partner of a law firm, but he was so starstruck that when Thatcher came into a room, it had an effect that very few people do. The Queen, as it room feels like it's a pinball machine on tilt, and it's all just tilting over, and everyone runs into one corner. Thatcher had that. And my friend, when he met her, couldn't get his words out. And she held his hand for like a minute, which doesn't sound like long, but in real time, as you're standing at an event, it is forever. And finally, he eventually got out, "You saved our country." And she looked him in the eye and she said very gently, "I agree."
Yes, I can well imagine her saying this, and I concur with that effect of
Me too.
the way she was in when she entered a room. I met her at a Bruise Group event, and she entered the room, and there was a lot of very eminent people in the room. I mean, I remember at one point jostling for position with this gentleman and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I want to get to meet her, and it was Norman Lamont. There was quite a few of us in that room, and when she entered, it was like the air left the room because everyone took a breath in, and I had that experience as well. I held her hand for that short period of time, and I was struggling as well. It must be a common thing that we were struggling. I just managed to say to her, thank you for everything you did for working class families like mine and people who were aspirational. And she actually said to me, which will always stay with me, she said, well, hearing that from you and from someone of your background makes it all worthwhile. And I thought, what a wonderful, wonderful moment. And, those of us who were privileged to meet the lady, the image that is portrayed of her to this day is so far from the truth, isn't it? It's remarkable. She's portrayed as this sort of loather of people and cold and icy, where she was totally different, wasn't she?
Yes, and let me tell you what I think about that. I think that we on the freedom-minded, broad political right of the spectrum are often busy thinking about the future and living our lives and trying to make money and look after our family and so forth. And our opponents spend so much time full of hate and pushing back on the past, and pushing back again, but they never, and this is the positive about them, they never leave their wounded on the battlefield, right? The left sought to, and pretty much successfully did, rehabilitate Neil Kinnock, whilst we left Margaret Thatcher 10 times his worth on that battlefield and let her be traduced and maligned at every occasion. And it's actually only the good common sense of the British public that restored her to anything like the position in public life that she deserves, because most people of our inclination had, one, dumped her from the leadership of her party, and then two, showed no real interest in rescuing her reputation. It was the common man, it was the man in the street in Britain who did that.
Yeah, and I'm not ashamed to say that I did shed a tear on when I heard that she'd passed away, even though it was unfortunately not all that unexpected. But she made a huge difference, and I'll tell you something as well. The number of times that I've heard since the Brexit situation, where we were trying to negotiate our way out of the EU, and actually since the COVID situation, the number of times I've heard people who you wouldn't have thought it actually say, "I wish we had Maggie. Things would be very different if we had Maggie in charge of this situation." It's a stark contrast, isn't it, to the sort of lily-livered jellyfish kind of politicians that we have in charge now.
It's really easy to fall into the syndrome of saying everything was better before, right? And actually, it must be very dispiriting for a young generation who we want to be inspired in politics to hear everything was better in my day. And so it's important for us to say we're not saying that. And actually, for me, it's not an insult or doing down particularly the current generation of politics, left or right. She was just an incredible giant. She was a one-off. And it's not to say that people now are bad. It's just that she was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note, let's move on to the present day. One of the big issues that I know will have been on your mind with the history that you've got of standing for freedom and various guises that you've had over the years will be the potential introduction of ID cards under the name of COVID passports or COVID certificate, vaccine certification. I think Boris is trying to relabel it as. Your thoughts?
Well, you framed it exactly rightly from my perspective, that we had a debate about ID cards in this country. The authoritarian side lost, but they never accepted defeat. They never went away. We've got a pretty significant and well remunerated chunk of the civil service who are basically securocrats who live to do nothing more than build systems and monitor us. My point is this: once we have this system, if we allow it to happen, it will never go away, Bill. Yeah. It will prove in their eyes so valuable for so many things that they'll always be providing a new justification for it. Right now, just like ID cards, basically it's a policy shopping for a motive, shopping for a cause, looking for a reason to exist. But once they get it up and running, they'll Christmas tree it, they'll hang every single thing on it and say, look, it fixes this and it fixes that and it fixes the other, and they'll never let us dismantle it. That's my view.
So you don't buy this potential sop that's being aired about it having a 1-year sunset clause on the legislation and so on. You don't buy that?
Bill, VAT was temporary in this country. Income tax was temporary in this country. Pub licensing hours were temporary in this country. Once we introduce things, the state, it seems, never really likes to let them go. And I think that it's well worth bearing in mind. Once there's a ratchet effect on freedom, it only ever goes in one direction. And if we let these people move this towards the way that they want it to be, we'll never ever get rid of them.
Yeah, I agree. And what concerns me is as well, I think people are under the impression that it's going to be a case of waving a bit of paper about, but it's going to be digitalized, I'd have thought. It's going to be tied in with facial recognition, tied in with other systems, cross-database links. This is just the very thin end of an enormous wedge.
Absolutely right. Look, there's two options. If it's paper-based, then it'll be, ignored and easy to defraud like every paper-based system has ever been. Just ask a youngster who got into a nightclub underage if you don't believe that. A paper-based system won't cut it. So they'll build a data system, and the state has never built a system with data that both works and is secure. Benefits database lost, breaches of healthcare data again and again. Our system, our country has never built a system that is secure. Once they've built this about you, not only will it be intrusive, not only will it have a great deal more about you than just your coronavirus status, inevitably, but they'll inevitably lose it. It'll be breached, it'll be hacked, it'll be lost on left on a train, it'll be willfully disseminated, whichever way around you like to look at it. Once it gets built, the state has proven not only is it oppressive to have this kind of data about you, they're just incompetent. They'll lose it, and at that point, your data will be in the hands of the worst people in society.
Yeah, and of course they're trying to use coercion to get this in by saying, "Oh well, you won't be able to go to certain things like football." It's coercion that
Of
makes
course,
it
it's coercion.
seem a softer thing because it's only
Well,
can't go to a football match. But it isn't about going to a football match. It's sort of making it seem trivial by discussing football when it's far more.
it's actually about allowing this moment, this long and unpleasant moment, to affect our way of life. And there, it doesn't matter what you like, whether it's going to the pub or going to the football or going to the theatre or whatever you enjoy, it's allowing our way of life as a people and as a country to be affected. It's the same argument as always. First of all, Bill, yes, we lost the argument about these powers last time when we wanted ID cards to fight terrorism, or when we wanted control, or when we wanted the thing, and we tried to justify it in a different way. Yes, we lost that last time, but it's different now. The need's so obvious, and it's only for a little while. No, it's not that different. And if it is different, it's that the threat is so much lower now. This threat is so small compared to the solutions they're proposing that it's completely disproportionate. But furthermore, the danger has passed. The majority of adults have been vaccinated already, and that program continues. Now, in my view, it's the time to look to return to normal, not to bake these abnormal circumstances into permanence, not to make things born of emergency measures into a way of life. And that's what people are trying to do now. And that's why there's such a broad coalition of people opposing these measures and opposing the creation of a new ID card, which they're trying to call a vaccine certificate.
And I spoke with Andrew Bridgen about this last night, who, as you would probably know and imagine, he's dead set against the idea. But he believes that much of what's going on, not just with these vaccination passports, but with much of the other COVID intrusions into freedom, which hopefully we'll get to speak about shortly, he thinks it's because there's a cabal of scientists, people from different kind of backgrounds who may not want these restrictions to end, may see a benefit to their favoured causes. These people are around the Prime Minister, and unfortunately, with Parliament sitting the way it is, which is effectively, not really sitting at all, there is no parliamentary scrutiny to stop them. This seems to me to be the most outrageous and scandalous situation in a parliamentary democracy.
So I agree with the part about parliamentary scrutiny. We thrive on politics which is oppositional. We thrive on challenge and ideas being tested by criticism and by being opposed, and we need to get back to Parliament sitting as normal as soon as possible. And if they need to test the politicians daily or twice daily to justify that, then fine. That's part of the sacrifice you make being a public servant at that level and of that privilege to serve our country. So on that one, I agree. On the principle that we ought to have these things scrutinised in Parliament, couldn't agree more with what you said. On the government one, I disagree, because I hope this government will change its mind. I still hope this government will see that it would be wrong to do this, that it would be contrary to the principles on which it was elected, and that it would be contrary to basic ideas of liberty and conservatism to allow this kind of power to be accrued by the state. So I haven't given up yet the idea that we can convince them. Indeed, I see it as my job, and as the job of people who feel like I do and you do, to try to convince government that that approach is wrong. And let me say one more thing about that, Bill, given that you were saying you were about cabal and so forth. Let's be clear. I believe in vaccination. I'm having my jab tomorrow. I'm not peddling conspiracy theories about the vaccine or the virus. I'm expressing profound concerns about the power of the state emerging from this long period of national agony. And we are likely, on our current course, to make significant freedom-diminishing decisions about the way we live that will be with us forever. And your lowest point, anyone who's been sick knows, your lowest point, your lowest ebb, that's generally the wrong time to make life-changing decisions.
Yeah, and to be fair to Andrew, cabal was my word, although he did imply there were advisors who perhaps weren't saying what politicians would have said. But in fairness to Andrew, that's the case. But there's more to this, though, because, I mean, as Andrew was, you're in favour of vaccinations. I don't have a view on the subject. But is it not the case that by this level of force, coercion, pressure that's being put on people, we talk about basic liberties and principles of freedom.
Absolutely.
What happened to the choice about what goes into your own body? Oh. Now, I know they're not officially making vaccinations compulsory, but they're making it pretty hard not to have one, aren't they?
That's right. But look, on the certification point, I think, where I think this argument's clearest, those who want the state to have more power are seizing this golden chance to get what they want, which is centralized databases, ID cards by another name, all of us monitored. The health kind of state and the health system in this country has always been very centralized. Well, not very, in the post-war era, has been centralized anyway. But I see that as a slightly separate discussion about the pursuit of that agenda, which often loses some basic points, like GPs have always been private sector, have always been self-employed rather than NHS employees anyway, and those nuances get lost in a debate about our healthcare system. But for me, that discussion about vaccination, it does come to a point where we make the basic point about principle, and that we have healthcare treatment by consent, and we don't visit upon people treatments without their agreement. And it's the job of government in any democratic society to convince people, to convince them to do something or not. And that, in the end, is why we have, public health initiatives and drives to have measles, mumps, and rubella jabs, to have treatments against conditions as they emerge in society. And it's government's job to convince us to have a coronavirus jab. I'm convinced I'm going to have one. But if there are some people out there who are not convinced, and I hope they haven't been swayed too much by, some of the wilder conspiracy theories that have been doing the rounds, but, they're entitled to make decisions about their own bodies, as you've been implying, then we've got to convince them. And if they're not convinced yet, you've got to try harder.
I think that where the issue comes down to, though, I mean, I'm all for convincing people. And as I say, I don't particularly have a strong view on vaccines one way or the other. I mean, and I think we can get bogged down in how dangerous COVID is or isn't, because we'll be talking for hours about it. But the thing that it does seem like a huge amount of pressure. As you say, try to convince, then try again, then make it so you can't go to a certain place. Pimlico plumbers have said no jab, no job. Yeah. These kind of things. I mean, there are matters of principle here. Now, I don't believe the conspiracy theories. We're not going to pick up 5G if we've had a jab and all this stuff. But if people actually believe in something, or people actually want to choose what goes into their body, is it really for the government to apply such pressure in cahoots with big business?
You say we can't talk about how the extent to which it's dangerous, but I would make one argument on that front, which is that the virus is serious, of course, but the mortality rate in an unvaccinated population is low. Yeah. In a majority vaccinated population, it's exceptionally low. Why allow a threat that is objectively so small to change our way of life? I would argue our society has seen off greater threats than this on not frequent, but not rare occasions. Britain has been confronted with threats and seen them off on a magnitude more significant scale than coronavirus, and not allowed them to change our way of life. And I think it comes down to a few things. One being the fact that those who want the state to have more power have seized this golden chance, which I've said already. The second one is a bit perverse, but we should at least mention it, which is that I think that coronavirus has revealed a certain authoritarian tendency in amongst us per se. I mean, there are some people who've loved lockdown, yes, which I find it mind-boggling to me, but many people love these restrictions. Many people have urged government to go further, to beat us harder, to lock us down more, to lock us down longer. There is a tendency in us, that in many in our society, who rather like this, who are timid or afraid or concerned, and show none of the spirit that I might have expected Britain to have. And that's not by no means is that the majority in my view, but that tendency is there, and we should be honest about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things, because you speak about trying to persuade the government to be less authoritarian and to get in their ear about it. But when opinion polls, time and time again now, we both know opinion polls can vary according to how the question's asked. But when time and time again they show thumping big majorities for taking tough lockdown measures, for restrictions being in place, I don't think that there's enough principle in the government to lead us away from that. I think they're probably more likely to follow the votes.
I don't know. And I first reason I say I don't know about that is that we, by choice, tanked our economy in 2020. We drove our economy into the ground. And if we carry on like this, our economy is going to suffer hugely. As it looks like we're going to bounce back and recover quite quickly. But if we carried on in semi-lockdowns and more restrictions, then we would be killing off industry after industry in this country. And no government wants to preside over that. And in the end, as we've seen time and again in this country, no matter who you are, what challenges you've faced, how popular you are, if you preside over an economic downturn, then the electorate will make up your position, will make up their mind on your position, and it won't be positive. So I don't think any government wants to preside over an economic crash, and we've got to come out of this lockdown as soon as possible. Second thing about it is lockdown isn't just comparing lives against economic benefits. It's comparing lives against lives. There is a backlog in the NHS. There's a backlog of treatments that is getting worse by the day with every other condition. We turned our NHS into a COVID health system. We turned our system from being a national system that treats every condition basically into just treating COVID and saying everything else can wait for a while. So the mental health suffering that so many people have had, the agony of unemployment and the reduction of the sense of self-worth that people have been visited upon, that they're building their businesses they've built up as self-employed people destroyed, smashed by coronavirus lockdown, people who've been let go by their employers, and the effect that has on them. Lockdown has many effects that are not just about money, it's about lives. So it's lives against lives. But I cannot demur from your basic point in the issue we were discussing at the beginning, which is of this part, which is that when the first lockdown was introduced, it was more popular than any political party. It was one of the most popular policies ever polled in this country. And for those of us very keen to get back to normal and to see life return to as we had it before and to have our freedoms restored to us, that might feel very strange, Bill, but it is unarguably the case. There are some people who still don't want us to come out of lockdown, and there are some people who absolutely adored it and thought that it was, who were really strongly in favour of it, beyond any normal public health measure might attract in terms of support.
Yeah, and I think the problem is as well, not only is it popular, but it is having an effect and changing the way people think. And there is going to be a huge, as you touched upon, a huge mental health crisis. I mean, if you only have to look at the website for Mind and look at the reports they've got going through, it's a catastrophe on a scale that might, in my opinion, probably even dwarfs what we've gone through with COVID. But it isn't just that. I today happened to go into a shop and as normal, wore my mandated mask and all the rest of it. And the lady who served me said, "Well, I can't wait for April the 12th to get back to the gym." She said, "I would have gone to the pub, but I'm not going to go now because I think that's where the super spreading takes place." Now, we all know that the hospitality trade is hardly responsible for any of this. And in fact, the biggest areas where COVID is spread are hospitals. Those are the facts of the matter. But this is a sea change in people's behaviour. If you terrify them for 12 months, you get them used to a certain thing. This expectation that we'll stop all of the lockdowns and bounce back to normal, I think it might be far-fetched.
I agree, and I also think that there's a number of businesses that have taken this opportunity to do things they would have wanted to have done anyway, or were hankering for some time to do, that coronavirus has given them the cover to do. Community after community, you will find, I think, that there's a bank that was there or a building society that sadly has now closed. You will, and that's because of coronavirus, of course. It's definitely not because they wanted to do that. Generally, I can think of an airline that presented very quickly its multi-thousand person redundancy package because of coronavirus. So, gosh, how convenient! You had that ready very quickly, didn't you? It's almost like you were prepared to downsize before this happened. And then to take the most extreme example, the Eurostar, even putting aside its financial troubles, which is, as far as I can tell, nothing to do with us because the French bought us out. But in terms of government position, we may make a societal decision, but it's not down to us, and it's down to the shareholders. But the point is that the moment coronavirus was announced, they basically said, right, that's Ashford and Ebbsfleet closed for the year and next year. You never wanted to keep those stations open in the first place. Yeah, you lose money on these stops. You didn't want it to be open. And so lo and behold, you've said that these stations in between can't open for the whole of 2021. Same, by the way, they've done with Calais, but they don't dare say it to the French because the French have a different attitude to us. You can tell the Brits something's not going to open for a year, and we'll kind of shrug and say, what a pity. You say it to the French, the hay bales come out, the tractors are parked across the motorways, the Champs-Elysees is picketed, the government falls. So instead they've just said, well, for the foreseeable future, the Calais Eurostar station won't open. Whereas the good people of Ashford and Ebbsfleet have been told, basically do one.
And not something I ever thought I'd say, but in that respect, I do quite admire the French.
Yeah.
They stand up for what they believe in. But, one of the things as well, though, is that during this crisis, the very, very wealthy, the billionaires, have increased their wealth. And my concern is that smaller businesses, the lifeblood of our country, and certainly to Thatcherite free marketeers like us, if you like, the Dell boy who builds up to something special, this time next year is a millionaire, they are being wiped out. And when the boom comes, because obviously there is pent-up demand, that it's going to come back, it's going to go to big businesses. It's going to change the model and shape of our economy.
That may be right, but of course, when there are some politicians in this country who've got into difficulties for expressing the Schumpeterian philosophy of creative destruction, and you do get into trouble if you're elected or aspire to be elected, pointing out the obvious truth, which is that if you shake the dial and things change, then you create opportunities as well as harm. And there may be some opportunities for businesses coming up now that we can't even anticipate, that we can't, many technologies that exist today were unimaginable a generation ago, and they create and they're coming into existence and fruition have in turn created opportunities that we couldn't have foreseen. So I'm not sure that I agree, but I do agree that generally when these crises come, there are some businesses with more fat and some businesses with less fat. And a lot of the time, it is larger and more established businesses that are more ready to withstand those kinds of challenges. But one difficulty that happens with the, no, better safe than sorry, precautionary principle that often emerges after this kind of experience is that people won't take even a little bit of risk and take a punt on the little guy. And moreover, at the regulatory level, where these decisions get taken, which really make a difference to us, we put up effectively, we won't call them this, but they're barriers to entry to new players that protect the incumbents, because you need more procedures and more protocols to make sure that everything's okay and hunky-dory. And we're going through two things at once, Brexit and coronavirus, which means that when we come out of this on the other side, we'll look at a whole set of things. And my fear is that our civil service class, the one we've been talking about that wants to seize a lot more power to the state, will look at things and say, we need to show our moral worth. We need to show we haven't been diminished by the Brexit process and we're not some nasty race to the bottom free marketeer Anglo-Saxons. We need to gold plate regulation and show that we can regulate as well as or better than Europeans. We need to show we're not taking risks in the post-coronavirus environment. We need more restrictions. That's what's going to kill entrepreneurialism. That's what's going to kill new business, in my fear. Actually, what's happened so far, entrepreneurs tend to be, and individuals can have terrible things happen, and I don't mean to be flippant about the experience that individuals will have had, but as a class, creators, entrepreneurs, wealth generators tend to be very resilient, and they can bounce back very quickly from these kinds of crises. You had one terrible crisis, you push on and you have on to the next opportunity. But what will stifle them is regulation and red tape, tying them up such that they can't flourish in the post-COVID, post-Brexit environment. And that's my real fear.
Yeah, and when you mention about the regulate ourselves to death to show our worth, it does remind me of times in Brussels when over and over again I would hear the EU politicians saying, well, the last thing they want is a Taiwan off the coast, an unregulated free market competitor. That is their greatest fear, because they know that if that was the case, and incidentally, that was my greatest hope with Brexit, that we would become that, we would compete the hell out of them and this country would absolutely boom. But we have an issue that there's a reticence in ruling class is probably the wrong word, but in our government class to actually seize that opportunity and to let us fly.
Well, not least because we had such a perverse public discussion about this this subject. First of all, you know, the Brexit position as portrayed in the BBC was either wild-eyed lunary, as opposed to conventional opinion, which happened to have been the bien pensant BBC's metropolitan position. That was the oppositional setup. It was wholly and solely an extreme fringe free market right-wing view, remarkably, given that it won a majority vote in a binary proposition in this country, in which more people voted than anything else. There was no left-wing aspect to it. Remarkable, given that Euroscepticism was the mainstream position on the left for a generation before the current leadership of the Labour Party. 5 million people who habitually vote for the Labour Party voted to leave the European Union. Did you ever hear the left-wing case for Brexit? No, you didn't. So no wonder people had a rather skewed and peculiar attitude to some of this in our governing class. It seeped from them in every pore, most obviously in the BBC, but not only because of it. I think the BBC is a soft left institution, but it's not that party politically biased. The bias really comes out on major decisions and culture war issues like Brexit, where their position was so absolutely obvious. They just hated it.
And I'm glad you mentioned culture war, because I'm going to come on to that shortly. But I just want to finish off on COVID-related matters for the time being by saying one of the things that came out of last night's conversation with Andrew was I speculated about this 2 tests a week that are being sent out to everyone. And I wasn't aware of this figure, but he put a figure in there of it costing £1 billion a week for these 2 tests to everyone in the country for COVID. Now, take out the fact that the tests do have a failure rate, whether how high or low that is disputable, but they do have it. But surely they aren't going to be all used. And surely if we're talking about £1 billion a week, would it not have been better to either, from my perspective, address some of the national debt with that, or perhaps put something in place in the NHS so that we have the intensive care beds should we have another viral outbreak of some mutant strain, or address the mental health crisis that's coming down the road? Surely this is the single biggest waste of money of the whole crisis.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure we'll have a national inquiry into this episode, and I'm sure there will be fingers pointed at many things on which we might have saved money. There are some things that government's done that it's accused of being a waste of money that I absolutely applaud. So, when it comes to vaccines, our government early pressed every button to see what lights up. That's why we were ahead of the curve on sourcing vaccines, and that's why we had a kind of, frankly, a positive moral position that we'd invested in so many vaccine opportunities. Yes, not all of them are going to come off, but we did the right thing in investing hugely in vaccines. So that was an expensive exercise, but one I applaud. The one you mentioned, I'm certainly not an expert on, but I would say that when it comes to track and trace, we had a world-class testing procedure. And people seem to have lost notice of this, but when we've been reporting higher rates than some of our neighbours, not just countries that have much lower GDP than us, or places that don't have the wherewithal, other mature Western democracies and near neighbours, France and Italy and Germany and Spain, we've been testing a great deal more than these economies. We've been testing far, far more than those countries. So, of course, in my view, we were likely to have a declared higher number. But one, it was more honest, and B, it meant we had a more accurate perspective on our situation. And at the other extreme of that, you have countries like Brazil, who are going through this position now where, very sadly, their death rate is exploding. And, it may look surprising, but it's because they've been so under testing. So testing a lot isn't necessarily a bad thing. Whether it's right to test twice in a week, don't know. It does sound a bit daft to me, but don't know. And on your and my last point on that is, I really respect, admire, and sympathise your point about the national debt. I fear you and I, and the small minority like us who care about such things, who still believe that debt matters. I'm afraid we're going to have to basically accept defeat on that for a generation. The government has just shown that it can pile debt very high and then shovel it onto the shoulders of children yet to be born, which we used to think was immoral. We used to think that that was wrong for one generation to pass debt onto another. But if you're watching this broadcast and you have young children yet to go to school, they will be entering retirement paying off the coronavirus debt that our generation has incurred in 2020 and 2021. A sobering thought, but it does, in my view, Bill, I'm afraid, mean that we are unlikely anytime soon to win the argument on national debt.
No, and although no stranger to fighting arguments, I know I can't win. I think you're right. You're right on that one. And this is the problem, though, because it's leading us onto another topic here, because the whole last 12 months has speeded up and embraced by this country and by its politicians of socialism. And I put it to you that we've, as you just say, we've accepted this massive spending that can never possibly be repaid in several generations. But not just that, we are now embracing wokedom. Culture wars that have been going on are actually having an effect on government and on policies that are affecting all of us. Our large corporations, particularly things like Sky Sports, and other ones, they're emphasising over and over again about different diversity targets, and you can't watch a game of football without people on their knees, etc., etc. This ongoing, very rapid movement from being a sort of conservative country, slightly right of centre, but even when Tony Blair had to pretend to be more conservative than he was to get elected, we now have a complete socialist consensus, and we are going headfirst down the rabbit hole of the socialist totalitarian state.
Well, I think there's certainly been a diminishing of the extent to which people are genuinely tolerant in the real meaning of that word. And the irony is that there are the people who pursue the agenda you have just described love the word tolerant. They think that that describes them, and that their enemies are intolerant. So if you are a conservative, Church of England attending, stick in the mud middle class white male man like me, then you must definitely be intolerant. Is their perspective. The irony of it is that a big part of diversity, at least in my view, is diversity of opinion. And the people that you are describing have narrowed public discourse and public debate to the extent that it's not just they portray it as, but they genuinely think that anyone who disagrees with them must be intolerant and therefore be stopped, in the interests of tolerance, must be stopped from pursuing their conversation or their philosophy or their belief. And that has led to a very significant diminution in the extent to which you can have any form of genuine exchange or public debate. Not only because the cries come that views X, Y, and Z are unacceptable and therefore can't be debated, but moreover, that often succeeds, and people are cancelled and off the airwaves and are restricted from appearing as a result. And that's a great shame. And I don't know if that's what you were getting at or not, but if that was what you meant, then I agree.
Yeah, well, I think that is part of it, but surely there's more than that. I mean, we have government discussions now about whether or not sex is a binary or gender is binary, and how many different genders are there, and these discussions. Now, being of a libertarian persuasion, I really have no issue at all with whatever anyone wants to say they are or behave like. But when we come into officialdom, surely the government shouldn't be spending time on working out whether there are men, women, and 72 genders in between and discussing these kind of issues. Surely that's bending under the pressure of this woke revolution, of this culture war that's going on.
Well, let's take it back to basic principles. I'm freedom-minded. I'm a conservative and I'm a libertarian. I therefore don't care what grown adults decide to do with their own bodies or what they'd like to be called. and what they call each other and what they call themselves. Now, I might not think that a man who wears a dress is a woman. I certainly don't believe that I should be ordered by the state to call him that which he is not, but I might call him something else because I am polite. I might choose to say, very well, I will call you she and I will call you Alice, because that's what you've asked me to do, and I'm polite, right? So I don't believe I should be ordered to do that, but if in any civilized society, I would like to be polite to people and be nice to people, and if that's what they would like me to do, then all things being equal, I'll give it a go. What I don't accept is the extension of that principle about the freedom of adults to choose what to do with their own bodies, even if it's really quite extreme what they might choose to do with their own bodies, and how they choose to be called and addressed and how to attire themselves. That freedom doesn't extend to medical treatment upon children that they might come to regret.
Yes.
And that's why I draw a bright dividing line between adults who are free to pursue a course in life, which might entail risk and harm to their bodies. It might entail severe challenges in the way that they socialize, and so what? They can do whatever they like. I mean, look. I mean, we allow people to pursue extreme sports, and we allow people to eat what they like and to drink what they like, or certainly we should. And these are risks that people can take unto themselves. And of course, in any society in which suicide, rightly in my view, is not a crime, then whatever you do with your body is up to you.
Yeah.
But that does not extend to, and this is where this debate becomes so significant in this country, where it's more and more prevalent, where we visit upon children basically adult-centric perspectives on a political notion of gender. And when you are doing that, you are using children who have yet to go through puberty and to reach a stage where they can make mature decisions about their future. And these are profound, just for the avoidance of doubt, life-changing decisions about the nature of a life when it comes to surgery. Or even blockers, which means that you're not going to develop as your body would otherwise develop. You're making life-changing decisions at a stage at which you are not equipped to make it. When people do that, they are using children as the social battering rams to develop a political perspective held by adults. It's the wrong way around. In society, you ought, when you come to child welfare, to care about the interests of the child. These policies are driven by concerns about advancing the adult's political perspective. And lest people think that this is outrageous, that we should deny autonomy to children, let's try this, that no one would say that we should restrict the ability of, let's make the argument extreme, of a 100-year-old to have a sex change if he or she wanted. And on the other hand, I think nobody would suggest that a child 1 day old popping out of the womb should be have a sex change visited upon them because people think that that child has decided to self-identify as the other gender. So given that we agree that there is a point here, one which it's fine and the other which it's not, shouldn't we treat it as we treat other things in society and say adults get to choose their own future, children have to wait?
Absolutely. And the only addendum I'd add to that is the 100-year-old who wants a sex change, as long as they have it done privately and pay for it, rather than it going through the NHS, because I do think there's been arguments about that kind of thing, and then that is ludicrous. If someone makes that kind of personal choice for me, they should pay for it. But I want to take on from what you've said there, because it's very interesting, because it ties in nicely with what you said about us losing the argument or for a generation or more on the economy. We are in danger, because of the way that kids are taught in our state schooling system, of losing the culture war argument for more than a generation, because the views that you so eloquently put forward there, if they were expressed in a state school, would be highly controversial. Our state schooling system suggests that, well, not just suggests, tells kids about the gender differences, tells kids that they have a choice of which way they're going to go with this. It also has certain truths about man-made climate change, for example, certain truths that the British Empire was predominantly 100% evil, and so it goes on. And when these things are taught as truths in school, you and I'm considerably older than you, but we can be this generation arguing this case. But the generations coming through, we've already lost the battle before we started, haven't we?
Yeah, look, I mean, I went to a state school, and it's only looking back that I realised that much. Actually, probably more at my middle school than at my upper school. Actually, that 'cause I was in Suffolk, where there's a 3-school system, not a 2-school system. Only in my looking back do I realise quite how left wing a lot of the things that were said to me in school, just taken as given, would have been. But the thing about that, Bill, what you said about my views being controversial. I don't think I'm very rarely accused of excessive modesty, but I attach no position. I don't think that my views are sacrosanct. I think that everything I've just said is my opinion, no more or less. And
Mm.
these are things on which reasonable people, I hope, can reasonably disagree. And that's the part we've lost. We've lost the ability to say, let's agree to disagree. We've lost the ability to say, well, that's your view. I don't hold it. But, you know, in any free society, I defend to the death your right to say it. With that perspective, that breadth of political discussion, which even when the two sides are going at it vituperatively, even when the two sides are absolutely lock horns in opposition, you know, when the fiercest flowers of the left in its strongest manifestations were, you know, having class war with the Tories, who were making great arguments about the future of Britain, and you know, that 20th century debate at its best. Even when they were really going at it, there was still the perspective that the other side's position was valid. In any democratic society, you were entitled to your view, and even if I thought the whole of it was nonsense, you were entitled to it. The pernicious and pervasive part of this is that whatever you want to call it, whether it's the modern left or the liberal left or the woke agenda or the cancel culture, whatever term you put to it, this new phenomenon, which is so prevalent in our media, the distinguishing and corrosive feature is that it doesn't accept that. Is that it thinks its view must prevail and anything else is absolutely illegitimate. That's the sadness and the shame of it. Not only that, do I think that you would be wrong if you hold a different position from me on the freedom of the individual or the tax base or the future of the health system or whatever. If you think differently from me, and I can think of any number of commentators I've been up against in the media who basically hold this view, if you think differently from me, then you must be racist. You must be, if that's the view you have on sex changes for children, you must be homophobic. If that's the view that you have, you must be bigoted. And therefore, not only do I disagree with you, not only do I reject you, not only do I find you personally repellent, you should not be allowed on air anymore. And that's where they lose me, because I'll take any kind of argument or combat. I don't mind having those discussions. I don't mind it getting fierce. I mind you saying we shouldn't be in the arena in the first place. That's when these things go off the rails.
Yeah, and I've witnessed that being said, and I've witnessed some of the social media reaction to your appearances, and absolutely understand what you're saying. But I mean, the idea of in the schools. I mean, my inner city school in Wolverhampton, the sixth form tutor was a rampant Marxist who looked for all the world like Jeremy Corbyn before Jeremy Corbyn looked that way, and he was actually from Shrewsbury as well, similar area. And we had some fantastic discussions with me being a crazed Thatcherite youth and him being a Marxist. And it taught me critical thinking. And, you know, at the end of that, and I can say this now because he's retired from teaching, obviously, we used to go to the pub and have a pint and a chat. And I think that kind of approach of remaining a friendship or respect whilst fundamentally disagreeing is what you're talking about, and it is being lost by the day.
Well, the other sad thing about that is that, I mean, even leaving aside the pub part, which would be verboten to the nth degree in the current sense, that we live in a very prurient and censorious age. We regards itself as very free. Actually, it's very intolerant and narrow-minded. And the idea that, oh my goodness, you went to the pub, gosh, hang him for his bad verses. You know, that would be absolutely verboten. But even leaving that to one side, because that's an easy target, teachers now would be far less likely to expose themselves to the position in which they've genuinely and robustly had a debate with you, which you, as it turned out, enjoyed and flourished from. But there's a percentage chance that someone's going to complain, that you reveal a political perspective, you reveal the colour. You might have been accused of, the teacher might have been accused of trying to persuade you, and certainly if he was a conservative or if he was a Christian, or putting, if that teacher is quite likely to lose on any outcome of any allegation or complaint. But you mentioned Tony Blair. Tony Blair was bad at many things. In fact, I think objectively he was bad for our country, but he was a very good communicator, and he had the brilliant, if shameless, gift of having no sense of shame himself. And so his shameless gift was that he was shameless. He was absolutely, he had a massive amount of chutzpah. So, disregarding the fact that he and his government had been responsible for it, he once looked over the dispatch box and said to Michael Howard, the problem is, disregard all this flim-flam about policy. The problem is that when you and I were at school, if you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home. And that's not the truth anymore. What he had done was to appropriate a conservative truth, really, and a truth about the role of the family in society, and the fact that if institutions and establishments are performing properly and are doing their bit and have a bit of discipline about them, and sometimes people may not like it, they should be supported, even if individuals might sometimes have a difficult time as they go through those institutions, rather than consistently and corrosively attacked and believing that the institution or the establishment is always wrong, which is what a generation have been taught to do, not least by one Tony Blair, which is why I describe his position and his attitude as so shameless. But nevertheless, he was saying a truth in that. And the teacher in your scenario would no longer exist, even if he was the wild lefty instead of the wild righty, because no teacher in his or her right mind now would expose themselves to the liability of having that genuine exchange and conversation with that child. And that is very sad. And I say that as the child of two teachers.
Yeah, and I agree. It formed many of my views, and it formed a massive respect actually for people who are Marxists and hold to those views and are prepared to debate and discuss them. There just aren't that many who are prepared to debate it anymore. But when you mention institutions functioning properly, and we're into the last few minutes, so I want to get one more topic in. The royal family, an institution which for many, many years has functioned extremely well. I would suggest largely down to the Queen herself.
Yes.
We have the Meghan and Harry situation now. We have Prince William openly speaking about environmental issues. We have Prince Charles openly speaking about environmental issues to the point where it's almost touching on politics. I would argue it is touching on politics. Where are we going with this? Do you think the royal family, and God forbid, I hope it's for many, many years yet until the Queen is no longer with us, but once she's gone, with this dysfunctional group of people, particularly the people captioned there, do you think that it's going to be able to continue in its current mode? Do you think it's going to work?
Well, look, I hope so, but let's be honest. Things are changing fast in our country. I'm a monarchist, and I'm a supporter of tradition, and I'm a member of the Church of England. And a little while ago, it would have been hard to believe that I would have thought that as long as we had an unelected House of Lords, and I'm not sure we should have one per se, but as long as we had, in fact, I'm sure we shouldn't have an unelected House of Lords per se. But my point is, as long as we've got a House of Lords which isn't elected, until recently, the idea that reflecting our national church and our national life, we wouldn't have the bishops in it, would be anathema to me. But now, the bishops of the Church of England, especially the Archbishop of Canterbury, seem, as far as I can tell, to be somewhere between the fifth column of the Labour Party and the paramilitary wing of the Guardian. Well, in that circumstance, I'm quite happy to see the bishops go. I know a few years ago I'd never have believed that, but actually, not only there's no point to them, right? At least if the Labour apparatchiks in the upper house are going to stick to their leftist positions, at least they do it without pretending that they speak for God when they do it, and at least they might once have been elected, right? So the Labour politicians in the Lords are twice as good as the bishops, who in recent times have had a massive go at Brexit and have had a massive go at the Conservative Party, and it implied that they would have to withdraw their kind of cooperation with government over things like Dominic Cummings, trying to bring down the government, just pure play political. The reason I say all of that is that it would have been inconceivable for me a few years ago to have come this close, not just to thinking bishops out of the House of Lords, but basically disestablish the Church of England. And if it's come that far for me, and my views have changed that far, it would be naive not to say that I, as a monarchist, might embrace some of the points you've made about this changing over time. We have been blessed with great leadership by our Queen, but one
Yeah.
day, inevitably, there'll come a point when she's not the Queen anymore. And at that point, things will change. Right now, I believe, and I will still think, that the monarchy is a force for good. I think that Prince Charles will be a good king. And even if I'm wrong, systems have endured bad kings in the way that America has endured bad presidents. But if they carry on like this and we have generations of wokery burbling out meaninglessly from the platitudinous speeches of members of the monarchy, then just like the bishops, in the end, I might think, what's the point? If that's your view, and if you're going to espouse these soft left perspectives, why don't you just go and run for the Labour Party somewhere and actually justify your position with an elected vote? And this is an attitude I never would have thought I would have had once, but they've just pushed us so far, Bill. That's where we are now, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Quick word for Prince Harry and Meghan. Any sympathy at all?
Well, of course, I have profound sympathy for a young person whose mother dies in those circumstances. And that's about as far as I can go on the sympathy front. He has thereafter, and I don't mean to be dismissive about it, that is a traumatic and life-changing and awful experience. But in his adult life, he's not had a hard time. He's got a great deal of money, notwithstanding their bizarre protestations about being cut off. I'm sure they would have found ways to make it work for them if they hadn't been. They tried to engineer this way in advance of their actual departure, as the contract negotiations with broadcasters have revealed. I think it's a great shame, but he's just gone off the rails as far as I can tell. And the most unambiguous thing is that negotiating, Netflix and so forth contracts with broadcasters and appearing on Oprah Winfrey, it's a strange way to pursue a private life, isn't it? It's a strange way to pursue an insistence that you must be allowed all the privacy in the world. The mind boggles, basically. But he ain't gonna. I don't know. Heaven forbid terrible things happen to others. It's always possible he could be king, but it's now an exceptionally unlikely proposition. So I just think we shrug our shoulders and say, just as monarchies have endured bad kings, republics have endured bad presidents, many a time and oft errant princes have been endured by countries. We can live with it. I just rather preferred it when he was chasing girls and running around Las Vegas. I thought he was more true to him, and when he was the happy-go-lucky warrior. And I rather miss the old Harry, don't you?
Absolutely. I did actually very much admire his style in those days. But I think it would make for a very interesting constitutional situation if Meghan gets her wish, allegedly, and she runs for US president and wins, and we have a British prince being the first gentleman of the United States. It'd be a fascinating situation, wouldn't it?
I was trying to imagine the first presidential press conference at which every question was met with the response that it was an unwarranted intrusion on her private life. You dare ask what the position was on policies X, Y, and Z. And actually, there's a whiff of faint racism about you daring to ask. So the mind boggles.
Well, on that note, I think we can draw things to a close. I want to thank you, Alex, for the hour we spent together. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great to really sort of explore the political ideas and views. And I think we've got some differences, but we can manage to have a good debate about it as discussed and bring them out without necessarily falling out, which is good. So it's yeah, and a little bit of housekeeping on this channel. If you wish to tune in, and please do, why wouldn't you? On May the 11th at between 7 o'clock and 8:30, we have Lawrence Krauss, Anne Widdecombe, and Mr. Godfrey Bloom debating theology in the 21st century. Don't miss that. That's going to be all wild. Next week at 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock. I'm sharing a discussion with Andrea Jenkins MP and Lawrence Fox, and we're talking about all sorts of wokery. So that should be fun as well. So don't forget that. But now all that remains to be said is, Alex, again, really appreciate it. It's been great fun. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
And to everyone, if you've enjoyed this, please share it around all your social media, share it around your friends, click on subscribe, join the YouTube channel, help us to keep on getting these debates out into the public arena. Thank you and good night.